Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Catholic Truth Podcast. We are so excited for you to join us today, and we are so excited to have you here tuning in because we have a very special guest, Walt Heyer. And Walt Heyer will be joining us today. He is a man who lived and identified as a woman for 8 years before transitioning back to a man. And now he has a passion to help other people who are struggling or who are confused or who have had a sex change and regret it. And he has an entire ministry and an entire website called sexchangeregret.com, where countless people have been helped by Walts and have regretted their sex change. And now he goes around the country and he speaks. He's an author of many books. He's been on many TV and radio shows across the Eastern Hemisphere. And we are glad to have him on our show today. Thank you for joining us, Walt.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. It's an important topic that needs to be talked about.
Absolutely. And we were wondering if you could share, because some people may or may not know you and may not know your story. And we definitely have people of all identifications who tune into our podcast and into our YouTube channel. And so people may or may not know you and your ministry. So would you mind giving us an overview of how you became transgender, your struggles, and the things that you faced growing up, perhaps?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's important to know that I'm bringing about 77 years of experience with this topic. I'm 80 years old, and I started as a 4-year-old boy cross-dressing with the help of my grandmother. And in 1944, I had no idea what the consequences of this was going to be. And I think that's what's kind of important for us to take note of. When we begin to cross-dress or allow a boy to cross-dress as a girl, what we are really telling that boy is that there's something wrong with you, that you weren't made correctly, that you need to be somebody else. The only way you can be loved or appreciated is if you change who you are. Of course, that's a total lie, and it does enormous psychological and emotional damage to any child who is affirmed just like I was and put in a purple dress like I was by my grandmother because she thought that she was doing the right thing. We're doing the opposite of what's the right thing. What we should be doing is affirm each young person as how God made them. And that is such a critical point. No boy should ever be put in a dress. No girl should be told they can become a man because it's false and inappropriate to say. But what it led to from the age of 4 years old in the cross-dressing was this purposeful cross-dressing went on really the rest of my life until I underwent gender reassignment surgery at the age of 42 because I went to one of those great gender clinics who tell you they're going to help you. And they diagnose you with gender dysphoria, which I laughingly say that they will diagnose a rock with gender dysphoria if you put it in front of them, because everything to them is gender dysphoria. They don't look beyond what the real issues are, what's the underlying causes and the underlying comorbidities. And those underlying comorbidities, when I went to this therapist who is a specialist, in fact, he wrote the standards of care that they're using today, the WPATH standards of care. He was actually the author, was my therapist. And what they don't do is dig into what happened to that boy or girl at a young age. In my case, when I cross-dressed as a girl, when my dad found out, he began to physically abuse me as a way of disciplining me. He thought he was going to sort of beat the girl out of me. What he was really doing was doing more harm and abuse to me. But further down the road was his adopted brother who sexually molested me because of the purple dress. So if we can stop for a moment and realize that the dress at the age of 4 that grandma made me caused me to be physically abused by my father and sexually abused by my uncle. Without the dress, none of that would have happened. So we set in motion by cross-dressing young boys a series of psychological, emotional, and in my case, sexual events. That's critical to know. That's why we should not do it. We should not affirm. people in their cross-gender identities. It's harmful, and we need to stop. And so, I went to this therapist, and he kind of ignored everything that happened in early childhood. It wasn't important. The only thing that was important to him was making sure that I got hormones and surgery. And at that time, this was 1981, and there's nobody around that's opposing this issue. There was no Walt Heyer saying, no, 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 don't do this. It's harmful. And so what happened then was that I believed what he said to be true when it actually wasn't true. And so I opted to get the hormones. I opted to go through the 2-year process of taking hormones. And then I had a surgical reassignment in 1983. And as a result, I had left my family in 1982 and began this quote transition, which is really a false word because nobody actually transitions. Isn't it interesting to stop for a moment and realize that in the history of all these surgeries that have been done, not one man has ever become a woman. All we've done is we feminized men and masculinized women. We haven't changed their gender at all because it's a biological construct that can't be changed by hormones or surgery. So the whole premise about transitioning is false information. It's a lie, and no one has ever changed their gender. What they can change, and we need to understand, is they can change their persona, which is a much more accurate terminology. That's our appearance. And we can't change the inner morphology. The inner morphology is who we are. There's millions of cells in there that you cannot affect a change on. In fact, a boy becoming a girl, the one interesting point is just the bone structure of a woman. They have large hips so that they can give birth to children. Men don't have that, and they can't change that. There's nobody giving new hips to boys so that they have the bone structure of a female. It doesn't happen. They're still a male. So to me, the insanity of us talking about people transitioning or becoming transgender, because I lived a life, I realized what a big lie it is.
Well, before you finish your story, I just want to say that I think the same thing, which is why 2 years ago, it was 2019, I believe, December 31st, newspaper in England in big letters says first man ever has a baby. And of course we made a YouTube video saying, what in the world are you talking about? A man cannot have a baby. Where did the baby come out of? How exactly did he have a baby? It is literally, and now we're saying that men can have a baby. And apparently the person who gave him the sperm was a woman, which is biologically, physically, and in all other ways impossible. So this kind of just goes to the point that you're saying, people are saying these things that are literally and physically impossible. So you were a woman for 8 years. How did you get back to becoming a man? I mean, what struggles or realizations did you face during that time, which, kind of brought you back?
Yeah. Well, isn't it interesting? If we use the right dialogue, I was never a woman.
Sure. You're right.
So I was identifying as though I was, but I wasn't. So the idea that coming back is some kind of big deal is really not such a big deal, because all I had to do then was go get a new wardrobe and re-identify as a male. So this idea about transitioning is much more of a psychological and emotional issue for people who want to get their life back. And I call it getting your sanity back. So you have to, when you go through this and they tell you you can become a female, which is a total lie. And many people write me and they say, I realized I could never become a woman. And the people who regret this and who contact me all realize that something happened to them in their childhood, like happened to me. When you have someone cross-dressing you, telling you how cute you look as a girl, you have somebody hitting you with a hardwood floor plank, and you have somebody sexually molesting you, you're going to have psychological and emotional problems and scars on your inner self that are going to need healing. And I can tell you that 100% of the people that I've worked with, which is in the hundreds, probably thousands, every last one of them can tell me what happened to them that caused them to not like who they are and want to identify as a transgender person that they can never become. So the whole thing is fabricated on lie after lie after lie. Biologically, no one in history of mankind has ever changed. Scientifically, no one has ever changed their gender. So we need to push back and tell people you can't change. And I've done this with 10-year-old girls. I've done it with 15-year-old girls and 70-year-old men. And so we're in a state where lies seem to have much more power than the truth does. And what's really most disturbing is that I think the church was really made by Jesus Christ to transform the world. But what's happening today is the world is actually transforming the church. The church has sort of gone woke on allowing these people in the pulpit. Many different churches say, well, it's fine. They're born that way. It's all nonsense. And, if we look at people through the eyes of Jesus Christ, we'll see who Jesus sees. They're either a man or a woman with psychological, emotional, or sexual issues that we need to address. Churches are a place to heal. They're not a place to exercise sexual preferences. They're not a place to sort of spread the LGBT propaganda, because many of the people it's propaganda. That doesn't mean that people who identify as male or female wrongly they all need to be in church, because that's where they're going to get redemption and restoration. Mm-hmm. So we don't need to push them out of church, but we should not allow them to transform the church.
Amen. And I see what you're saying too. You said you were not a woman, so you didn't need to come back. And yet I see all over the place that men become women, but then become men again, and then women, and they flop back and forth. I mean, why does that happen so much? And now today people are justifying it. They're like, oh, well, this is a certain type of sexuality where you can identify as both at the same time. And it depends on the day. And it seems like it's all being made up. And I like what you're saying, because you're saying you can't change. And you're not saying that to be mean-spirited. You're saying that because you love these people passionately and you actually want to help them, not just promote a grand delusion that isn't going to help them, but is actually going to hurt them over time.
Well, that's right. And I think what's even more important is to understand many of these individuals who are swinging back and forth are actually suffering from a word that people don't talk much about, but it's called autogynophilia. And autogynophilia is a psychological, emotional, or sexual issue where men dress up in women's clothing. Some women do the same thing. Fewer women, however, are affected by autogynophilia, but primarily men who are heterosexual, by the way. Over 90% of the people that I work with who identify as transgender men, who they're women, they identify as a woman, but they're heterosexual men, not homosexuals. And many people think, oh, they're all homosexual. The only ones who do this cross-dressing that are homosexual actually are the drag queens. Everybody's familiar with them. They're very flamboyant. They're over the top. They have eyelashes 3 feet long, and the makeup everything is just way exaggerated. The transgender people try to blend into society, and they're primarily heterosexual men who are struggling with autogynophilia or transvestic fetish or transvestism. They're really not changing their gender. They're just acting out. So what happens with a person with autogynophilia? They put on women's clothes, they look in the mirror, and what they see in the mirror becomes the object of their sexual affection. In other words, they don't need a partner. They don't need a male or female. What they see in the mirror is their partner. And you can see the disconcerting disconnect between reality and what they're struggling with. So autogynophilia plays a huge part in this whole idea that people are transitioning. They're not. It's a sexual fetish disorder for a large portion of them.
Thank you for that. And Walt, what made you realize that you weren't in fact a woman? What made that realization in your life?
Well, you start with these things, and there's several things that take place. It's sort of like the clicking on a clock or the gears. You go, I wonder about that. I wonder about, and you begin to develop this and go, I don't know. So when I began to have these feelings, I started studying psychology at UC Santa Cruz, and I began to look in the library books and study different caseloads. And what I realized was in studying those things that every one that they studied, this was many years ago now, 30 years ago, they had, every one of the people that they studied had some psychological, emotional, or sexual disorder who identified as transgender. I mean, one young person who identified as a female was very close to his mother, and his mother passed away. And soon after her passing away, he identified as a woman. And what they said in this was he had what they call separation anxiety. He actually took on his mother's identity as a way to feel like his mother had not died. In other words, he was keeping his mother alive in his female identity, but he identified as a transgender. That was a psychological and emotional disorder. So if we don't take the time to sit down with people who are struggling, and this is where people don't like what I have to say, I'll say that in advance. But what the truth is, we need people to sit down with these individuals and say, what caused you to want to identify as this other person? Because you can't become that person. And I do this with the people who contact me. And after a period of time, they're all free to tell you what happened to them. As an example, I'm working with a 26-year-old man today who they said was transgender. They did surgery on him in March. And in my talking to him, I was able to discuss with him what his history was. Well, he was sexually abused by his older brother. He was physically abused by his alcoholic dad. He was diagnosed with PTSD. He was diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder, and he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So their solution to this guy's problem is to cut his genitals off and tell him to identify as a female. That's going to fix all that. I mean, if you stop, anybody with a little bit of gray matter could stop for a minute and go, that is totally insane. It's just beyond the pale, because if we dealt with the individual's sexual abuse, if we dealt with his bipolar 1 disorder, if we dealt with his schizophrenia, his desire to change gender would actually evaporate, and he wouldn't need to cut body parts off and ruin his life. Now, this individual says, I want to get married and I want to have children. Well, he can't do it. They've prevented him from being able to do this. So if we can just take and learn lessons, like from my book, Trans Life Survivors, which is a phenomenal book. People need to read that book, and the companion book is Paper Genders. If you really want to dig in and learn what this is about, I cannot more suggest to you what you need to do is get Paper Genders and Trans Life Survivors. It will open your eyes. You'll see exactly what's going on.
Wow. Thank you for that. And I like how you're helping these people. I just wish they got to you before they ruin their lives. And you said it's insanity, which it is, but how much more insane, I should say, is it that we're doing the same thing with children now? We're telling children that they can choose their sex, that they can be whatever they want. I mean, these are children who literally would jump off the house because they think they can fly, and they believe there's monsters under their bed, and they believe they're the tooth fairy. And many literally believe these things because they don't know better. But yet we're saying they know better than us what sex they are, and they don't, we need to let them choose. I mean, what do you have to say about that?
Well, remember, the people that are doing this aren't the kids. It's adults telling them they can do this. Adults could also sit there and tell them, no, you can't do this. This is nonsense, Johnny. You can't become Judy. The problem is nobody seems to have the capability of confronting children who are struggling with these things. I just worked with a 10-year-old girl who had been identifying as a boy, working through the mother. And within 2 weeks, she stopped identifying as a boy, because what we discovered was she had been sexually abused by her father. And so, she used the term, I had a bad dad, that's what happened to me. And so in every one of these cases, if we just stop for a minute and stop affirming, we got to stop the affirming. That, as adults, we're insane. if we affirm somebody because we're lying and we're doing a construct on somebody that's going to harm them. These people will suffer for the rest of their life. Keep in mind, I was one of those children that you're talking about today. And I'm talking about it 77 years later. If that isn't a testimony to what the destruction is, to doing this to young persons, I don't know what is. I would like to not be talking about this. I don't get a joy out of talking about the harm done in my life and the suffering that's done to other children today, which is happening at a rapid rate. We need to stop the insanity and tell kids, no, you're actually perfect the way you are. You don't need to put on a dress. Johnny doesn't need to become Judy. Johnny is perfectly fine. Let's affirm him. Let's find out what is he looking at stuff on the internet? Is his older brother telling him he can become a girl? Is he being told at school? Our schools are now indoctrination centers for the LGBT. We may as well just turn the schools over to the LGBT. Parents ask me and say, get them out of the schools. The schools are horrible. They no longer are teaching children the truth. All it is LGBT day, transgender day, gay day, bisexual. This is the kind of thing that is absolutely destroying this generation of children, and parents need to step up and fight back and not allow it to happen.
Yeah, powerful. And it's really, really, really sad that our culture has devolved into this. And I agree with you. We need parents. Parents, if you're watching this, stand up, do something about it, fight back before it's too late. Because I know in other talks, Walt, you have said it's child abuse to do that. I mean, as you said, we don't affirm people in their schizophrenia and say, oh, this is who you are, just be that. We don't affirm people in their body integrity disorders or their anorexia or any other disorders out there and say, oh, this is who you are, just be that, live that, don't let anyone else tell you what to do. And we don't demonize people who say, oh, how dare you tell her that she's not really that skinny, or how dare you tell a woman this or this person that. No, we want to help people, and that's what you want to do. I love the point that you made that by affirming them, we're actually destroying them. We're hurting them for the rest of their lives. That is an incredibly powerful point. And the only way to actually help them is to love them enough to tell them and get them the help they need, not affirm them, because that's not going to help them. And, cutting off body parts and other things like this is actually hurting people. So I think that's really powerful, and especially for children.
It's self-destructive behavior. It's self-destructive behavior. If you look at the process of what this whole idea is where they pass people down, the self-destructive, because the first thing they do is fill a kid with hormones. Then they have the girls cut off their breasts. Then they cut the genitals off a boy. All of that is self-destructive. There is nothing positive. There is nothing good. There is nothing healthy. There is nothing that's going to last a lifetime that is going to help that person through their life. And we wouldn't give an alcoholic the keys to a liquor store. I mean, if the government, the government's very much into this transgender thing. If they use the same kind of psychology, they would give every alcoholic a liquor store or make them a bartender. Or the people who suffer from spending too much, then the government should just give them all credit cards and tell them to go spend the world away. We don't do that. We try to help people understand that there's something going on that's causing them to behave this way, identify what that cause is, and that's what I do with these young and older people as well, and talking about things like autogynophilia, transvestic fetish disorders, cross-dressing, sexual abuse, body dysmorphia, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. All these things play a huge role. And if we want to stop and be intellectually honest, there are no transgenders. They don't exist. It's a word that's made up to make you think that taking hormones and cutting off body parts, you're going to become somebody. You're going to become a mutilated individual who has really no gender sex except the one that you were designed to have. Remember, when the sperm hits the egg, the game is over. It's all innate and unchangeable. And so it's so disheartening to think that people can't see the science and understand that when that sperm hits the egg, it's all done. It's all over, and nobody can change anything from that point on. The only thing we can do is affirm what God has made and keep them healthy and understanding that they don't need to change who they are to be perfect in the eyes of God.
And that's what doesn't make sense to me, is even the science today isn't trustworthy because they're changing that for political reasons. And I think it's a very slippery slope. But if some people will say that if you do not affirm them, well, we need to affirm them because they're going to commit suicide. Look at how high the suicide rate is in the community of transgenders. I mean, we have to affirm, we have to help them. But is that really the issue at large here? Is not affirming them the reason why they have such a high suicide rate?
Actually, affirming them is what's causing them to have suicide. And that is documented not by me, but by Sweden, who studies every single individual. And they've been studying it for over 30 years. And they have come out, they have stopped giving children hormone therapy because Sweden recognizes from their medical records how harmful it is. And we should follow Sweden because they have the best records in the world on this. And they say changing genders will cause you to be 19 times more likely to die by suicide than if you don't. So everything that they tell you about helping is actually the opposite. We need to flip everything upside down and tell them you're lying and you're harming people. We need to close the gender clinics. We need to stop giving them hormone blockers that were never intended to be given to children in the first place. They were never intended to be used for transitioning, which is a phony term. They were used to help young children whose puberty was going too fast, and it was to slow it down and regulate it so that they could track with a normal development. But the left-wing people have decided that they can use this to suppress the hormone development and keep them docile and give them hormones later so that they can, quote, change them, which they can't do. I mean, that's another big lie.
So in helping them, I bet the people you're working with have a 0% suicide rate because you're actually helping them. You're getting to the bottom of the problem. You're freeing them and you're making them feel better. And that's why I'm so glad that you're doing the work you're doing, Walt. And I'm so glad that there are people like you, because I know in your story, you said when you were going through this, there was literally no one out there you could go to. When every time you brought it up, people would, tell you you're wrong or bad things would happen. So you internalized it, never talked about it, and felt like you had nowhere to go. But that's not the case anymore, because you, who have studied this extensively and have helped so many people and have a track record of helping so many people, now people have a place to go. I mean, can you just take a second to tell people about your ministry, and if anybody is struggling or has regretted their sex change or wants help, where can they go? Where can they find you?
Yeah, well, at sexchangeregret.com is where they can find me. But I do want to say that, suicide is a very tricky thing. And I've been fortunate that the people I've worked with haven't. But that doesn't mean that someone contacting me who is in distress might not commit suicide, because we know that 90% of all suicides, regardless of what the issue is, suicides are caused by unresolved psychological, emotional, or sexual disorders. So sometimes they'll contact me before we can actually get them into the psychotherapy that they need. And so we've had people that are on the edge that I've talked to before they can get into therapy. So we've been fortunate, but that doesn't mean that I can prevent everybody from committing suicide. I would never make that statement. No. But if we have the opportunity to speak into their life and dig into their comorbid disorders, whether it's bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, whatever it is, we do have a great opportunity of bringing them back to sanity and saving their life. And that's what we do at sexchangeregret.com. And I'll mention the books again: Trans Life Survivors and Paper Genders, two of the most important books on this subject that there is today.
And just so you know, and just so our viewers know, we will link all of this below. We will put your website down there, and we will put your books down there. And we will make it easy for people to find if anyone is interested in doing that. So I want to thank you. Well, I know we just scratched the surface on this topic and there's so much more, but I would direct people to your books and to your website and to the work that you do, because it's great work. It's so needed. Thank you so much for doing it. And thank you so much for coming on our podcast today and sharing it with us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for letting me speak into this most important issue in our society today.
100%. And I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning into this podcast as well. Thank you for continuing to come back and learning these lessons. Now it's your turn to go out and buy his books, read it, digest it, and start fighting back against the culture. We can't give what we don't have. If we can't use a sword or a gun in battle, if we're in the military, we're going to die. And if we don't know the arguments to our faith of what our culture is bombarding us with, we are not going to do well, and we are going to die spiritually. So we need the arguments to fight back against this in a charitable and logical, knowledgeable way. So definitely go check out his books and, check out Walt's other videos and learn the material and start to teach people about it and help people and direct people to a place where they can get help, not where they are affirmed into something that is not going to help them. Also, if you would like to follow Catholic Truth, please check out our Instagram, our Facebook, Pinterest, and all of that down below. Please leave a comment if you have any questions. Anything else, put it in the comment section. And please pray for us, as we are always praying for you. God bless you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Kate. I'm the video editor here at Catholic Truth, and I just wanted to say on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for taking some time to watch our videos and learn more about your faith. You guys really make this channel possible, and we truly appreciate you being here. So thanks again, and God bless.